All right. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all our Torah Anytime viewers and subscribers. Tonight we are learning Leilu Nishmat Rabbi Avram ben Chaim Yehuda and Yecheskel ben Rabbi Avram. So the topic for tonight is topic on chesed, on kindness. Now there's many different ways and I guess views to look at kindness. Some people think that they do kindness and it's really far from kindness. There was a story that goes that there was a wealthy man who was very stingy, and he would not give anything to anyone. And one time there was a poor man that knocked on his door, and the poor man says, "Please, can you do me a favor? Can you give me something to eat?" And the rich guy says, "Listen, I don't know if you know what people say about me, but you came to the wrong house." And the poor man looks at this mansion and he says, "Can you do something?" And the rich man says, "I'm sorry, I can't do anything. It's not. I just can't give." So the poor man said, "Listen, I'm starving. I'm not going to make it. Can you do me a favor? Give me even something that's from the garbage. Give me something. I just need something to survive." So the rich man says, to give you garbage, I think I can do that. So he goes into the garbage. He finds some spoiled, meat and, some spoiled food. And he gives this to this poor man. And this poor man wolfs it down. And this is old, rotten, food. And the second that it goes down, the poor man is like, not such a smart idea. And he starts turning away, and then he faints. And the rich man is sitting over there, and he sees this poor, person sitting in front of him, use air quotes, his guest, and he fainted. So he quickly picks him up, puts him in his car, and rushes him to the hospital. He says, this guy just fainted. So the doctors run some tests, and they start putting him in IV drip. They try getting him back. He's going back and forth. He's hanging on life and death. And here, the rich man is sitting over here, doesn't know what to do. He's sitting over there with this poor guest and watching him as he's on the brink of between life and death. After a few hours, unfortunately, the poor man doesn't make it and he passes on. This rich man feels bad. He goes and takes him, goes along with the kfura for the burial. And after the burial, he gets home and he sees that his wife sees him and he's very happy. He's like smiling. He's in a very good mood. So the wife says, "Why are you so happy?" He says, "I know you had a difficult day from the hospital to, all over the place." So the rich man looks at her and he says, "When can you do so much with so little?" She's like, "What are you talking about, so much with so little?" He says, "I had a rotten piece of meat, a rotten piece of food that I did so many mitzvahs with it. Number one, I did hachnasas archem. I gave this poor man something to eat. And then I went to visit him in the hospital. I took him to the hospital and I went to visit him. I did Bikur Cholim. And not only that, I also did Levias Ames. I also went and helped him on the burial. There's so much that I did with this rotten piece of meat." So here's this rich guy. He's looking at the act that he did, and he's looking at it as an act of kindness, an act of amazing kindness that he was repaid 10 times for the kindness that he did. But in reality, we know what he did was really bad. And whenever we look at our life and we look at things that we do and things that we think are kindness, maybe they're not. And things that we think are maybe are the opposite of kindness, maybe according to the Torah, they're actually kindness. So it's apropos. It pays for us to go and look into the Torah to see how we're supposed to do kindness and how we're supposed to do chesed. And with that, we could see what is really kindness that we do and what is not kindness, what we do. Now, kindness is a huge topic in the secular world, especially in positive psychology, a psychology where it's about the positivity, the happiness of what brings joy. The acts of kindness is in the secular world and is brought down that it has so many benefits. It has and not only benefits like, okay, I feel good that I did something. No, but it actually changes the way that your body, there's a chemical change in your body, meaning that there are levels. It's what it's called in layman's term, I guess, the helper's high, where you feel this euphoria. You feel this when you do something good. You feel good about it. And on the biochemical level, this is centered a lot of based on oxytocin and release of dopamine. This feeling is almost like a minor feeling of like a morphine high. It's a high that comes from doing good and it brings this internal type of happiness. But now this is the question that I had, and this is a question that I told you guys before we went on the recording, that I had this question. I couldn't find the answer until a few minutes ago, and I'll tell you the question. The answer will be all the way at the very end. B'ezrat Hashem. So the question is as follows: in the secular world, it's very, very important that you do good deeds, you do kindness, because in essence, it benefits you. Meaning that when you do good for others, there's a helper's high. You have this oxytocin release. You have this dopamine release. You have this feeling that is good, and hence it's good to do to others because you gain for for yourself. But now this is the question that I had. So in the secular world, and there's a lot of people that came out with like a rebuttal on this theory, where if you do good for others, you will hence feel good, and it even goes further that said that you'll look younger because there's a certain releases of chemicals that if you help others, there's certain feelings that coincide in your chemical reaction that makes you look younger and feel younger and be healthier and dilates your blood vessel. The science is very long on it and very interesting, but we're not going to go through it today. But the one thing that is known is that you feel good about it. So where does that good feel? When you do something good for somebody else, where does this come from? Like, where does this good feeling stem from? So from the secular standpoint, it comes from because you feel appreciated. Meaning you feel it needed. And there was a study done that when someone does something good for someone else and the other person appreciates it, the other person thanks you for doing that good deed, you in turn feel good because you feel appreciated, you feel wanted, you feel thanked, you feel that you feel the gratitude that the other person is giving. So you feel good because the other person is making you feel good. But what happens if you do a good deed to somebody else and that other person ignores you or doesn't even know about it? Do you still have that helper's high? Do you still feel good about what you've just done? So the secular thought on it, and again, this is there's a lot of different categories in it, but one particular one is that if you don't have that feeling of appreciation, the feeling good that you have is not the same as the feeling good as if the other person appreciates what you have done. So this is from the secular standpoint. It seems that it's better to do kindness, it's better to do chesed when the other person knows about it, when the other person could appreciate it, when the other person could thank you. But we know from the Torah standpoint, it's the opposite. The highest level of chesed is when you do it and the other person doesn't even know about it, right? That's why the tzedakah, one of the highest level, is that you give one of the highest levels is that you give when the other person doesn't know where it's coming from. Meaning, so the other person doesn't have the ability to even thank you because they don't know who you are. Now, why is this important? Because you're protecting the person that you're giving. Meaning that when you give someone something, that other person has a feeling that they owe you now. But now there's not that feeling because they can't connect what they gave to an actual person. And this is the question that I had. The question I had was, wait a minute, we know the Torah is the right way to do. But when you look at it, like in a sense, like, it's not really a contradiction, not really a question, but it bothered me a little bit. But really, it should be that if you don't know the person, meaning that if you do it, the kindness, you do the chesed hidden, it should be greater than if you do it that the other person knows. And the secular is vice versa. So this is the question that I had, and the question hopefully we'll be able to answer to some extent at the end of tonight's shir. So I want to start off with two studies. There was a study that was done in the Journal of Social Psychology. This was based off of researchers in Great Britain, that they took a group of people and they divided them into three different groups. Group number one was instructed to do daily acts of chesed, daily acts of kindness for the next 10 days, 10-day study. Group number two was told to do something new each day for themselves, meaning that you do something, something novel, something new. Group number three, no instruction, just live your life as usual. So 10 days went up, and they all came back, and they all had to participate in what is called a satisfaction survey. See how they were doing in the past 10 days compared to where they were before the past 10 days, and they ask a whole slew of questions. And they found out, based on the study, that the people that engaged in acts of kindness and the people that did something new, for themselves, in these 10 days, had a higher boost in happiness than the third group who did nothing. But we see over here that doing good for others and doing something new for yourself kind of was on the equal standing point of where they felt better, they felt happier, they felt good. Then comes the second study. And the second study was published in the Journal of Happiness Studies. That this was conducted by Harvard Business School. Harvard used to be a name that you should be chashav. Now it's going down into the dumps, and rightfully so. But still, the knowledge that comes out from it is high level. And also University of British Columbia. And here they made a study where they took a group of people and they split them into half. The first half, they told them to remember the last time they spent either $20 or $100 on themselves, meaning they bought something for themselves, either in the $20 range or in the $100 range. And they took the second group and they asked the same question, but instead of spending $20 or $100 on yourself, when was the last time that you spent $20 or $100 on somebody else? And whenever they had this memory in their mind, they were asked to complete a sort of a survey or a scale to measure how happy they were. And then what the researchers did is that they gave all these participants a certain sum of money, a small sum of money, and they gave them two choices. Either number one, spend it on yourself, or number two, spend it on someone else. Give it a gift, a donation, doesn't matter what, just on someone else. And they said, you choose whatever is going to make you happy. Meaning, there is no other reason other what will bring you the most joy. And they also said, whatever you decide, you'll be anonymous. Meaning, no one will know. Because if somebody knows, it'll be like, okay, I'm gonna give it to somebody else. Because nobody's gonna know. It's gonna be anonymity. It's gonna be completely anonymous. No one's gonna know about it. Just do whatever makes you happy. So you had this group number one that was thinking about things that they bought for themselves, and you have group number two who was thinking about things that they bought for somebody else. Then they were given money and said, now what are you going to do with this money? So they found two findings in this. First, they found that the people that gave something to someone else, they felt happier, meaning that they used that money of $20 or $100 and they gave it and they bought something for someone else. They felt happier than the people that did use that money, $20 or $100, on themselves. And they found something actually very interesting over here, that it didn't matter, like spending more money didn't increase the joy or the happiness. The $20 or the $100, both of them were on the same level of happiness, more or less, than compared to each other. But they found that when you use the money for yourself, you had a lower level of happiness as opposed to when you give to somebody else. But then that's the first thing that they found. The second thing that they found was the people that were asked to think about what the money that they gave to somebody else, they were more likely to now give the money that they received from the study to somebody else. So just give you a recap so know what you could be holding what we're talking about over here. There were two groups of people. One group was told to only think about money that they spend on themselves, either $20 or $100, money that they spend on themselves. Group number two was think about the same amount of money but that you spend on somebody else. The group that was thinking about spending money about somebody else was significantly higher in happiness. But also the group that was thinking about spending money on somebody else, when they were given money and said, do whatever you want with it, they went and they gave the money to somebody else as a gift more than the people that were just thinking about the money that they spent on themselves over here. And they called this the positive feedback loop, meaning that they came to the conclusion that when you do good things, eventually it's going to make you want to do more good things and more good things and more good things. And this is what we know the Torah calls is mitzvah goreres mitzvah. This is not something that you had to go study. You had to look in the Torah, when it was given 3,300 years ago, and you could have figured this out right then and there. But it took the scientific world 3,300 years to come to this conclusion. But we see over here something very interesting. We see over here that when you do something good, you have a wanting to do it good again. You want it to continue doing it. But there's another factor to that. And that is that when you do a mitzvah, you get a schus, you get a merit to do another mitzvah. And this is a topic that people tend to forget, or people tend to not know, or people tend to not correlate. When you do something, meaning that if someone does a lot for the community, for Klal Yisrael, for the world, that's a merit that they have. Meaning there are a lot of people that want to do a lot of good, but they don't end up doing a lot of good. There's a lot of people that want to learn, but they don't end up learning. The fact that you're able to listen to this class, the fact that you're able to learn any Torah, the fact that you're able to go online and you can listen to, that is in itself a merit. We don't realize that because we tend to take that aspect for granted, that when you're doing something good, you have to realize it's not just all on you that you did something good. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God gave you a merit, a schus, to be able to do something good. So if you're listening to a Torah class, you got a merit from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that allowed you to go and listen to a Torah class. Many people, they don't even have that option. They're going to sit and they're in front of the TV or they're in front of whatever it is that they're wasting their time with, and they don't have that merit that you have that you're listening to a Torah thing. So there's two aspects over here. Number one, when you do a good deed, it brings you the opportunity to do another good deed. But also, just in a caveat, and this is number two, then when you do a good deed, when you do a mitzvah, it gives you the merit to be able to do another mitzvah. So that is the introduction, and now we can begin to speak about the topic at hand, what I want to get to, and that's on this week's parsha. And Parsha's Bo, in the Shmos, chapter 11, verse 2. A very, very interesting pasuk. Very interesting verse. The pasuk tells us, "Daber na ba'aznei ha'am." Speak to the people, v'yishalu ish me'eis re'ehu, and let them ask a man from his friend, v'isha me'eis re'ehu, and a woman from her friend, klei kesef v'klei zav. The simple translation of this is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, tell the people that they should ask their friends, meaning the Egyptians, and the men will ask the men, the woman will ask the woman, for gold and silver. And they will take the gold, the gold and silver. So we have to ask a few questions over here. Well, I will start with two questions. Question number one, why does it say, please take money? We know everybody, or most people, love money. You don't have to say, oh, please ask them to take the gold and take the silver. Everybody, what's the please of the asking it? Question number two is, what's up with re'ehu? Re'ehu means a friend. Why does the Torah say, oh, go ask from your friends, the Egyptians, to take gold and silver? The Egyptians who were not their friends, like at least to our understanding. So what is going on over here is that the Torah is telling us that, the Moshe is telling the Jewish people to go and ask the friends, your Egyptian friends, for the gold and the silver. So the Sefer told us, Adam says that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did, he first asked a Jew to tell another Jew to do chesed. Meaning he said to one Jew to another, V'yishalu ish me'eis re'ehu, over here, according to the Toldos Adam, is not referring to the Egyptians. It's talking about from one Jew to another Jew. Do chesed is basically what Hashem was telling. He says, you do chesed to the other one. Ask each one to borrow something. Ask each one for the woman will ask for the woman, and the men will ask for the men. Why did Hashem want to do that? So the Toldos Adam says that what happens is that when you do chesed over here, there is a yisayru, there is a awakening of chesed up in Shammai, meaning that everything is midah k'neged midah, everything is measure for measure. So if you do acts of chesed, you do acts of kindness over here to your friend, there will be acts of kindness in heaven, and what will in turn trickle down, that there will be acts of kindness done also with the Egyptians, that when you ask the Egyptians for gold and silver, they will give it to you, as well, let's call it. So, meaning that there was the way that the geulah started. The way that it all originated was it was started through chesed, and we have to try to uncover. We have to try to figure out why. Why did it start this way? So when Moshe grew up and he went out of the palace, one of the first things that it says about Moshe, in fact, as an adult, this is the first thing the Torah tells you about Moshe Rabbeinu. It says, "Vayi bayam mehem," and there was those days that Vayigdal Moshe. Moshe grew up, Vayetze alachav, and he went out to his brothers, Vayar b'sivloisam, and he saw in their suffering. And then the pasuk goes on that he saw that an Egyptian was going to hit a Jewish person, and we know the ending of it is that Moshe killed the Egyptian to save the Jewish person. So what's happening over here? So the Medrash goes on and says something very interesting. That Moshe went out and he saw their suffering. He saw that they were suffering. What was their suffering? The Medrash says they didn't have a day of rest. They were working 7 days a week. Every single day they were working. So he was the stepson of Paro, right? He lived in Paro's palace. Batya, Paro's daughter, took care of Moshe, raised Moshe. So he goes over to Paro And he says to Paro, he says, listen, you got to do something for your Jewish people, your slaves. He says, you're going to kill them. They need a day of rest. So Paro goes and says, okay, I'll give them Shabbos, the day Shabbos off. And that's where they got Shabbos off. And we spoke about this last week, what they were doing on Shabbos. They were reading the Megillah, whatever. We're not going to get into that. But in any case, they got the day off. Ask, and this Rabbi Fran breaks down, ask the Ikfei Erev. Says, why did Paro agree to save the Jewish people? Like, isn't the whole point of everything, Paro was throw all the baby boys into the river, kill, he wanted to kill out the Jewish people. So why is it when Moshe Rabbeinu was coming to Paro and he says, oh, by the way, what you're doing is going to destroy it's going to kill out your slaves. Paro should have been with good. That is the plan. That is what we're trying to do. But Paro was like, no, okay, fine. What can we do to save it? Oh, we can give a day off. Okay, fine. So we'll give a day off. What's going on over here? So the answer is that originally Paro wanted to kill all the entire Jewish people. But what happened is that as the years went by, Paro was getting free slave labor. And free slave labor is really, really good. It's great. So Moshe knew this. Moshe knew that Paro's greed for free slave labor was greater than his need and want to kill out the Jewish people. So he acted on the need of Paro to have that free labor. Because if he goes and all the Jewish slaves just die out, this is going to be a major shock to the Egyptian economy. So Moshe Rabbeinu went and he acted on that, and he said, okay, now I'm going to ask you, please give a day off for them, because it's going to be for your benefit. It's going to be for the benefit of the slaves. They're going to be able to work better. So we see over here that Moshe Rabbeinu had an in. He had an inside ability to help the Jewish people. So now let's come to the scene at hand with the scene of this, in this pasuk, where there is an Egyptian hitting a Jew. And Moshe Rabbeinu goes and kills this Egyptian to save the Jew. But Moshe knew that this is going to come at a risk. The risk is that Paro will find out that Moshe Rabbeinu killed an Egyptian, and he's going to lose his in. So wouldn't it be better, wouldn't it be more beneficial for Moshe Rabbeinu to let this Egyptian beat up this Jew, take one for the team, but Moshe Rabbeinu will still have that in. He will still have the ability to help the Jewish people, in the future. And we could see how much he was able to help. He just went out at the beginning, and he was already able to go and take it from 7 days of week of working to 6 days of week. That's a significant help to the Jewish people. So why did Moshe risk everything just to be able to save one Jew? So the answer is so beautiful. The Alter Nevad explains that Moshe Rabbeinu, it says in the pasuk, "Vayifan kai v'chai," he was looking this way and that way. Vayar ki ein ish. So the simple interpretation, the simple explanation of this pasuk is Moshe Rabbeinu saw that there was an Egyptian hitting a Jew, and Moshe Rabbeinu looked this way and that way. He saw nobody was around, no Egyptian was around, so he went and he killed the Egyptian and he went to save the Jew. But the Alter Nevada goes and says, no. He explains the pasuk a little bit different. Moshe Rabbeinu saw this scene where an Egyptian is beating up a Jew. And Moshe Rabbeinu was looking this way and that way. You know what he was looking for? He was looking for, where are the other Jews? Why are they not standing up to this Egyptian? Why are they not going and saving this Jew? And he saw ki ein ish. There was nobody. There was nobody that stood up for this man. There was no one, and Moshe Rabbeinu knew that the geulah, the way that Mashiach is going to come, the way that the end is going to, the way that the redemption is going to come, is only when you have that every Jew cares for every other Jew. But the Jewish people in the time of Mitzrayim, they were every man for himself. Everybody was focusing on himself. Like, what, I'm going to start going and risking my life? Everybody was on themselves. So Moshe Rabbeinu knew that the secret to Geula was that every Jew needs to care about another Jew. The essence, really, of you look at the Torah begins with chesed and ends with chesed. The pasuk in Tehillim tells us, Olam chesed yibana. David Melech tells us the world that stands in chesed. The Torah begins with chesed, where Hashem does kindness for Adam and Chava by giving them clothing, and he ends in kindness because Hashem helped bury Moshe Rabbeinu. Excuse me. So Moshe Rabbeinu knew that The world is built on kindness. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that the geulah comes because of the chesed, because of you care for one another. And Moshe Rabbeinu looked this way and that way, and he saw that there was no Jews, there was nobody standing up. He says, I have to give up everything. What can I do? The geulah can come unless people see that you have to stand up and willing to sacrifice everything for your fellow Jew. And Moshe Rabbeinu went and he stood up, and even though that he lost his and he lost his power inside the palace, and he was banished from the palace, and he had to go run away and be in exile for many, many years. But he said, in order to start the process of redemption, he had to show the Jewish people that you want to save yourselves, you want to get the redemption, you want to get out of this gullus, you want to get out of this exile, you got to go and do for another person. You have to go and care for another person. If you don't care for another person, it's never going to start. So this is how it started. And this is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells the Moshe Rabbeinu, Daber na ba'ozneam, go and speak to them. Yishalu ish me'esrei eyu. It says each one should ask from his friend. And what kli kesef v'kezav? It starts off, ask from, borrow, do chesed with one another. Once you do chesed with one another, then it's going to go, and you're also going to ask from the Egyptian for the let's call it the chesed, to give the gold and the silver. And explains the Netziv. Listen to this beautiful idea. The Netziv says, the simple interpretation of the pasuk that the people will ask from their friends is actually referring to the Egyptian, right? They're asking from their friends. This is referring to the Egyptian friends. How, why, and since when are the Egyptians considered their friends, right? We said, so one interpretation is that the friends was talking about a Jew, one Jew to another Jew, but there's actually a simple interpretation. The Pashup shot is that it's referring to the Egyptians. It's referring to the Egyptians. So then it makes this question even stronger. Listen to this beautiful question. In Parshas Shemos, the Torah speaks about that when the woman was supposed to ask from her friend. It didn't use the word friend. It says you ask from your neighbor. B'sha'ala isha mishachenta. It says in the Shemos, in chapter 3, verse 22, it says that the woman should ask from her neighbor because they were not friends. So in Parshas Shemos, the Egyptians were known as neighbors. In Parshas Bo, in this week's Parsha, it's known as their friends. What changed from Parshas Shemos to Parshas Bo? Answers the Netziv. What happened in Makas Choshech? Right, in this week's Parsha is the plague of darkness. The plague of darkness, we know that the Egyptians were not able to move. For at least 3 days, they were not able to move. How do they eat? How do they drink? How do they survive for 3 days without eating or drinking? And the answer is something miraculous, something that I had never heard before until this past week when I was learning this. And that is the Jewish people fed the Egyptians. The Jewish people knew the Egyptians are not able to eat, they're not able to drink. So the Jewish people went into their houses and gave them food and water to drink. And that's why the Egyptians realized that the Jewish people are now their friends. They saved their lives. So in Parshas Shemos, they were just neighbors. They were their owners. They were the slave masters. They were the masters. But in Parshas Bo, all of a sudden became friends. They realized, oh wait, look at the chesed that you did for me. Look at the kindness that you did for me. And okay, so now the Torah says, now go ask from your friends to borrow, using air quotes, to borrow the klei kesef klei zav, to borrow the gold and the silver utensils. So now we have to come to the next question. The next question is like, okay, so we get the idea that, it started off with the Jews and they were doing chesed with one another. And then it went to the Egyptians and they were doing chesed because they did chesed before, because they gave, the food of their. But the simple question is why? Why did we have to go in such a circumventing way to go and get the Egyptians to give the Jewish people the gold and the silver? Like, why did it have to go this way? So we know that the Torah, in Bereshis, chapter 15, verse 14, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises to Avram Avinu, to Abraham, that the Jewish people will be enslaved, but the and after that, Yetzu Berechush Gadol, they will go out with great possessions. They will go out with tremendous amount of wealth. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu needed to pay it. God gave a promise to Avram, and the promise was they're going to be enslaved. That was checked off already. But now they have to go out in great wealth. So now Hashem says, "Listen, I gotta keep my word." So He says, "Go to your Egyptian friends, go to them, and and ask to borrow the gold and silver, because after all, this is what I promised your forefather Avram Avinu." So the question that we have to ask after that will be like, this is God that we're talking about. Couldn't He done it in any other way? I mean, Hashem gave the Jewish people food miraculously through the man. He gave them water miraculously through the well. give them the money miraculously. Let them wake up in the morning and all their belongings is full of gold and silver. Let it fall from heaven just like the man did. Like, there's so many ways that God could have gave the Jewish people money. Why did it have to be in this such an odd way that they went and they had to ask to borrow the Egyptians? We have to ask that. What's the whole idea of borrowing? Like, well, like either pay me for the slave labor that I did, or like give it to me, whatever. Like, what's the idea of borrowing that I'm going to bring it back? So, in the back of many Gemaras, there is a commentary known as the Rashash, Rav Shmuel Shtarshan. The Rashash was a huge tzaddik, huge big Talmid Chacham. He was also a very wealthy man. So he ran a gemach, a free loan society, where people came and they borrowed money, interest free, and they paid back, at certain, whenever the loan was due. So one time a tailor came to him and he says, I need to borrow some money. So they wrote up a document, they wrote up the shtar, they wrote up the agreement. It says you're going to return it by this amount of time and this is the amount of money. And they wrote everything, they signed everything, and the tailor got his money and he went on his way. Some time goes back and the tailor decides he's going to pay him back, if he got the money a little early, wants to pay back the rabbi a little bit early. So he goes over and knocks on the rabbi's, door. The rabbi, tells him to come in. The rabbi's in the middle of learning in one of his, farms. So the tailor comes in and he says, I have money for the rabbi to pay back for the loan that I borrowed. So the rabbi is like, okay, fine. He's still learning, and he takes the money and he puts it in the sefer that he's learning. He stuck it in the sefer and he starts turning the pages, and by the time he finishes, he completely forgot that the money is there. Months go by, and the rabbi is looking at the ledger, and he's looking to see what is, who owes and who paid back, and he sees the tailor, and he says, wait a minute, the tailor never paid me back. He didn't remember the tailor paid him back because he put the money, his mind wasn't learning, and he wasn't focused on the tailor giving him, the money. So he calls his tailor, and he says, I see over here that you borrowed money and you never paid me back. And the tailor says, no, I did pay you back. I came over here on this and this date, and I gave you the money. And the Rashash says, I'm sorry, I have no recollection of it. And the tailor says, but I gave it to you. And then he says, I would have remembered if you would have gave it to me. And then they went going back and forth. And the Rashash says, okay, let's take you to Din Torah. Let's go to court and see what the Bezdin says. They went to court, and the Bezdin heard each side. And the Bezdin said, it seems like the tailor is right, that he paid back and he doesn't have to pay anything back. So fine, that was the end of the court case. But word got out that this tailor was going against the Rashash, meaning the big Talmid Chacham, the big tzaddik, the Gadol Adar, was going over there and says, you owe me money. And this guy says, no, I didn't owe you any money, even though the Bezdin says he really didn't owe him any money. But people were like, okay, there's something wrong with this guy. Like, we're not going to do business with this guy. Like, if the Gadol Adar says, he owes and he says he doesn't, even though he was, he was not required to pay anything at all, the name went out there and he started losing customers slowly more and more. Over the course of a few months, he lost everything and nobody wanted to go over him there. He had a bad name. He had to, get up, sell his house, and he had to move to a different town. He moves to a different town. Some time goes by, and the Rashash is going and he's learning a sefer that he learned, that time when the tailor gave him the money. And he opens up the book, he opens up the sefer, and he sees the money, and all of a sudden it all comes back to him, and he realizes the tailor paid him all those months ago, all those were years ago, however long this took. And he rushes to find out where this tailor lives. He runs to the tailor and he starts begging him, please forgive me. He says, you did pay me, and I completely, misunderstood. He's like, please forgive me. The tailor says, what am I going to forgive you? He says, my name is ruined, my business is ruined, I have to go to a different town. He says, how am I supposed to forgive you? So the rabbi says, okay, I'll go into the town, I'll make public announcements that you were right and I was wrong all along. And the tailor says, rabbi, he says, what are people going to think? He says, you're a rabbi, you're a sweetheart of a man. He says, people say, yeah, you feel bad for me because I lost my business, I had to go to a different town. He says, you'll feel bad for me, and that's why you're going around and you're telling people that really I'm right and you were wrong all along, just because they're not going to really believe it. So the rabbi's thinking, he says, you're right. And the rabbi's thinking, and the rabbi says, but I have a different way that I can make it work. And the tailor says, how? And the rabbi says, listen, I have a daughter, and you have a son, and they're both of marriageable age. He says, ordinarily, I would go for somebody who's very learned and, goes, like coming from a house of a tailor. He says, you wouldn't be my choice of the type of boy that I would want for my daughter. But because of the situation, I want to make a shidduch from my daughter to your son. So the tailor hears that to make a shidduch with the child of a gadol dar. He's like, you can't give that up. And he says, done. And what happened was that once they went and the people found out that the gadol dar is really doing a shidduch with the tailor that he had this feud with about a while back, they realized that everything was really settled. And then when the rabbi says that, oh, he really didn't, he really paid me back, everybody really believed him. So what was happening over here? The rabbi, had to rebuild the reputation and the self-esteem of this tailor because he brought it down. And how did he do that? By setting up their children in marriage together. So the idea when God had to send the Jewish people out with great wealth, if the Jewish people would have received the money miraculously, if the compensation just came from heaven, they would have got the money, but they would not have gotten their self-esteem. They would not have felt good about what they received. But if it came directly from the people that subjugated them, as almost like a payment for what we have put you through. So now all of a sudden that becomes okay. So not only did they get their money, but they also kept their self-esteem. They had their pride. They were able to live with that, and that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu specifically went and specifically told them, he says, I want you to go and ask from your friends, ask from your neighbors. HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated all around. Look at the kindness. Look at the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. First, in order to do that, you have to start with kindness with one another. Then you're going to do the kindness with your other friends, the Egyptians, because you did kindness in Makas Choshech. And now that you're finally up to this, you're going to be able to go and ask them to borrow the gold and silver. Why do you need to take specifically the money from them? Because if you get it from anywhere else, the pride, the self-esteem, you're not going to be coming out of it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, when I give something with full. I don't give something with a partial, negative connotation to it where you're going to still come out of it. So they went out of Egypt with the money and with their self-esteem, with their pride intact. Asks Rabbeinu Nissim, why is it that want to know why they specifically had to borrow it? I'm using air quotes. They had to borrow the money and not just say, okay, give us the money because this is compensation for what we have all the work of the hundreds of years that we spend working for you for free. The reason why, explains Rabbi Nissim, that they have to say the words borrow is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted the Egyptians to chase after the Jewish people. He wanted the Egyptians to come and chase after the Jewish people. And the question is why? What is the point of having the Egyptians chase after the Jewish people? Because if the Egyptians would have said, okay, fine, here's your payment, let's be done with it. All these plagues, we're done with it, just take it and go. What would happen if the Jewish people left their captivity? They left it, but their captors, the people that were their masters, they still exist. They still in the land nearby. Would they ever feel free? What happens if you walk along the street and you see somebody that used to be your master? You don't feel so good about it, right? Or you'll even be a little bit fearful, like maybe they're going to come take me back. The Jewish people would have never felt the true freedom. They will never felt the actual freedom unless the Egyptians are no longer. So in order to have the Egyptians no longer, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated in a way that the Jewish people would borrow it initially. As if they can't ask for the compensation. They could have simply asked, this is compensation. The Egyptian would have been after 9 plagues, after 10 plagues, a bit like compensation, I'll pay you double, just get out of here. Right? But there was specifically an aspect of borrowing, because what happens is when you borrow, the Egyptian says, wait a minute, they didn't pay this back, so let us chase after them. And when they chase after them, HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroyed them in the ocean. Destroyed them in the Red Sea. When the sea split, the Egyptians didn't make it, the Jews made it. Why did this all have to happen? Because that is the true freedom. The true freedom, and this is the true chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is where there is no negative there's no negative aspects of the other side, meaning that the Egyptians can't go and can't get them back. They can't go and they can't chase after them. Their Egyptians are gone. They're done with. The Jewish people are now they're ultimately free. So now we can begin to understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Jewish people out in this manner, and now we can begin to see the chesed, the kindness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, did it. And with this, we can take it a step further, and that is that why is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu went and he took them out after 10 plagues? Meaning that couldn't Hashem just simply have done one big plague and just until the Egyptians just be like, okay, we're done with it? Or better yet, what could have happened was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could have made redemption of Mitzrayim, similar to the redemption of Babel. Meaning that after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, after the destruction of the first temple, the Jewish people were in exile in Babylonia for 70 years. And then they went back. You know how they went back? It wasn't like a miraculous way they went back. The king of Persia, which was Koresh, Cyrus, and he was inspired. He went and he said, God gave me all these kingdoms, and he commanded me to build the temple in Jerusalem. And he told all the Jewish people, go back to Jerusalem and go rebuild your temple. This could have happened in the exile of Egypt. Paro could have had this change of heart, this change of mindset. And he says, you know what, I changed your mind. You guys could all, you want to leave, go ahead. Just very simple, just leave. Why is it that God created the whole Exodus in so many miraculous way that it had to twist Paro's arm and say, okay, get out. Now I want you to get out. Explains Rav Shlomo Kluger that Paro had to be defeated this way. Why did he have to be defeated this way? Because God wanted every single one of us, every single Jew, to realize that I am your God who took you out of Egypt. If it was like Koresh, if it was like Cyrus, if it was like it was in Persia by Babylon by the destruction of the first temple before the second temple, if it was like that, then you would have been okay. It was a change of heart, and we would feel like in debt to Paro. Paro had a change of heart and let us out. But Kadosh Baruch says no. He says, I want you to realize that it was nobody else other than me that took you out. We say in the Seder, in the Passover Seder, and Pesach Seder, we say that if Kadosh Baruch Hu wouldn't have saved us and taken us out of Egypt, then our children and our children's children will still be enslaved, will still be mishubadim to Para b'Mitzrayim, in Para Mitzrayim. And the answer is like, what? Famous question is like, what are you talking about? There's no more slavery anymore. The Jewish people will not be still, slaves in Egypt. So what does it mean that all us and all our children, they would still be mishubadim, they would still be enslaved to Para Mitzrayim? Explains Rav Shlomo Kluger. Says, you know what it means, mishubadim? Mishubadim does not mean that you're enslaved. That means that you will be in debt. Mishubad is the same words for you be in debt, meaning you'll be in debt to Paro. That if HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't free us the way that he did, and instead it was the way that Paro just had to change of heart, and Paro decided, you know what? Let the Jewish people go. I'm a good guy, and I don't want any, okay, I caused them enough harm, let them go out. Then we would feel in debt to Paro. After all, Paro just let us leave after all these years. So we would have had this debt of gratitude that we had to give to Paro. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no. I want you to know that you owe nobody, the debt of gratitude you owe is to me and to nobody else, only to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was saying. And many commentators explain that the geulah, the final redemption, when Mashiach comes, it's very similar. It's a paradigm to the Yetzias Mitzrayim is a paradigm to the future geulah. And that's how it's going to look at. And this is what Rav Pam said many years ago. He says, why is it that the nations of the world hate us so much? Why do they hate us so much? Because the Gemara tells us in Avodah Zarah, page 2b, that in the future, when Mashiach comes, the nations of the world are going to come to God and be like, we're here to collect reward. God said, what are you collecting reward? It says, what do you mean? We built cities, we built tunnels, we built bridges, we built so many things. Well, Hamas is going to say they built tunnels, but everybody else can say we built bridges, we built roads, we built cities. What do we build this all for the Jewish people? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you did what? He says, yeah, you got to give us reward. After all, we all cared about the Jewish people. And this is something very interesting. Rav Pam says, you know what the purpose of United Nations are? Rav Pam, this is years ago, he says, you know what the purpose of United Nations are? Because what is United Nations? Since its creation, it was just a forum to figure out how to bash Israel, how to bash the Jewish people. Because you want to know what the purpose of United Nations are? Is that every debate, every vote against the Jews, everything is recorded. Everything that South Africa is doing and everything that all the other lands are doing, everything is recorded. And when it comes to the time Mashiach comes, and all the nations are going to come and be like, oh, wait a minute, we were here for the Jewish people. We hosted the Jewish people. South Africa is going to come there and be like, oh, Jewish people are, they flourished. They were here. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, oh, yeah, really? You want to get reward? What happened over here? You're going to point to the United Nations are going to answer so much. Like, we don't even begin to realize the chesed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing with the United Nations, is not worth anything now. But when Mashiach comes, oh, that's going to be payback. Everybody's going to come and be like, oh no, but we were also part of the chosen nation because we helped them. And every vote, everything again, this is what Rav Pam said years and years ago. So we begin to see the chesed, the kindness of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes and HaKadosh Baruch Hu acts. And it's getting a little bit late, but we have to get through a little bit more. Now, when I want to share with you something just on the aspect of chesed, and a little bit of a deviation, but we're going to get back to the topic at hand. When the Jewish people left Egypt, it says that the dogs didn't bark. Right in Shmos chapter 11, verse 7, it says, Lo yirchatz kelev l'shana. The dogs didn't bark. As a reward for that, the pasuk tells in Shmos chapter 22, verse 30, that treifa leisachel, you're not allowed to eat treifa. This is improperly slaughtered meat. You can't eat that. But like kelev tishlachun, but give it to the dogs. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu God rewards every single animal, human, whatever it is. If you did something, you will get rewarded. The dogs didn't bark when the Jews left Egypt, so the reward is there that they're going to get the meat that the Jewish people can't eat. They'll feed it to the dogs. But there's another pasuk. There is another verse, and that says that every firstborn donkey has to be redeemed with a lamb. And this is the concept of the sanctity of the firstborn. Now we know that there is a kedusha, there is a sanctity of human beings and also of domesticated animals that firstborn are considered holy. So the father of a human firstborn has to redeem his son by giving 5 silver coins to the Kohen, and the firstborn of animals also has a kedusha, also has a sanctity, and that has to also be given to a Kohen. But this only applies to kosher animals. There is one exception. There is one exception to this rule, and that is the donkey. The donkey is considered holy, where donkey is not a kosher animal, but it's considered, the firstborn is considered holy. Why is it that the donkey is considered holy? Because the donkeys help the Jewish people carry out all their gold and silver that they borrowed from all their neighbors, all their friends. The donkeys help them carry it out. And when the Jews took out all this money, they took out all this gold, all this silver, they couldn't do it by themselves. The donkey helped them. Hence, the donkey now has a sanctity, has a kedusha of the firstborn, just like the kosher animals and just like the human beings. Asks Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, wait a minute. If we're dishing out the sanctity, the kedusha, why didn't the dogs get that? The dogs didn't bark; they got the improper meat. The donkeys, they carried the gold, and they got a higher level of reward. They got their sanctity, their kedusha, they're holy. There's a kedusha to the firstborn. So the answer is, Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld answers that in the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the dogs just kept quiet, and when you keep quiet, you get rewarded. But the donkeys schlepped. The donkeys carried. The donkeys helped the Jewish people. It physically did. It didn't refrain from doing something bad. It did something positive. It schlepped for them. It did something good. And that's why it's invested with kedusha. It is given the holiness. Because when you do something for someone else, that is a much higher level of refraining from doing something bad, from someone else. And this, along these lines, we see something very interesting. Targum Yonasan ben Uziel tells us that you look at Dassan and aviram. These are two Jews who were not the best Jews. They were very wicked. They didn't even want to leave Egypt. It says that when the Jewish people left, they didn't leave. They stayed with Paro. They only joined the Jewish people later on. But they stayed with Paro. The question is asked: how did these people stay alive? We know that only 1/5, only 20%, only a chomish left the Egypt. Mitzrayim. These were the righteous Jews. 80% were unworthy. They died in Makas Chosha. 80% of the Jewish people died in the plague of darkness because they were not worthy. So how was it that these two people, they were worthy? They did so much bad. They were with the rebellion of Korach. They constantly complained about, on Moshe Rabbeinu. Explains the Maral Diskin that these two people had a very special merit. They have a very special schus, and they were the overseers. The Egyptians hired people to oversee a group of Jewish people, and if this Jewish group, which was run and managed by a Jew, If they didn't produce enough bread, who got the head? The taskmaster, the one who was in charge of the group, he got the beating. Or he would go and tell the Egyptians who was the one who was slacking off. But these people, Dassan and aviram, they took the beating for their fellow Jews. They did not want the Jews to take the beating. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a soft spot for a Jew who suffers on behalf of other Jews. Dassan and aviram were wicked people. They were not good people, yet they survived until the rebellion, until they went to Machlokas. They survived everything. Why did they survive so far? Because they did for someone else. They had this chesed aspect of it. That you see the impact of chesed. That you see the power of what chesed can do. That even if you fall so low, but if you still have chesed, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is just going to save you and is going to give you. And this is where you see the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu. His first greatness was that aspect of chesed, was that aspect of feeling for someone else. This first thing that the Torah says that we spoke about before. The first thing is that he saw their suffering. Rashi says he felt their pain. There is a special aspect when you feel the pain. When you begin to feel for someone else. Right now there's a lot of people that have guilt, survivor's guilt, where the people are in Israel and they're suffering, and they lost family members, or their husbands are in the army, or they're going and they're in America and they don't feel the same, and they feel bad about that. They don't have that same suffering that the other people. That in itself is feeling for someone else. It's very interesting in the way that it works. The way that we're talking about over 100 days since the attack on October 7th, and you look at it. It's the people split into two groups. You have one group that kind of forgot and continue living life. And then you had another group that is, they just feel guilt. They just feel bad. They're like, I get this question quite often that, I don't know, I have to, if I don't say Tehillim, I think someone's going to die. If I don't do, I have to just do this. They feel guilty enjoying life at this point because they can't. The Jewish people, their Jewish brothers and sisters are suffering in Israel. They feel bad. In a sense, this is what the Torah is talking about. Is that when Vayar b'sivloisam, and Moshe Rabbeinu felt in their sufferings. We have to feel for the sufferings of our friends, of our brothers and sisters in Israel. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to show Klal Yisrael, and he gave this all up. And he says, "I'm going to go and I'm going to save this Jew, because you have to know that in order to survive, you have to go and feel for somebody else. You have to go and to give to somebody else. You have to go and focus on somebody else and not on yourself." And this is the chesed of doing for others. I want to share with you a story from the Kav Yashar. Still thinking I wanted to make a series on the Kav Yashar. I still might do it. So the Kav Yashar brings down a story about a wealthy man. And this wealthy man had a beautiful, modest daughter, everything great, in deeds, and every aspect she was great. And he set her up to marry a great, boy, someone who's well learned, someone from a respected family. But unfortunately, the night after their wedding, this boy was nifter, died. And it was terrible, the whole, everybody was feeling bad. The first night after the wedding, this person died. Some time goes by, and the father finds another amazing boy, respected family, well learned, and she goes and she marries this guy also, and lo and behold, the next morning, this guy does not wake up, also dies. She's 2 for 2. He tries it, some time goes by. Finally, there's a third time. She marries somebody else, and again, right after the wedding, this person doesn't wake up. She goes and she tells her father and says, "Listen," says 3 times, I can't. I'm going to sit alone as a widow until HaKadosh Baruch Hu has mercy." Meanwhile, this wealthy person has a relative, in a nearby country, and this relative was extremely poor. And he had many, many sons. And what he did was him and his oldest son would go into the forest, would chop down trees, would chop down wood, bring it into the city and sell firewood. And that's how they would be able to make a living. But they lived paycheck to paycheck. That means day by day. If they sold wood that day, they had something to eat. If they didn't have anything to eat. They hit a rough patch, and they didn't make any money one day. And the entire family had to go to sleep hungry. The next morning, the father and the oldest son woke up and went back to work. But because of the weakness that the father had, he fainted, in the forest. So the son goes, revives and brings him back. And the son goes and tells his father, asks him for permission, and says, do me a favor, father, we can't continue living this. Let me go out. Let me go and try to make some sort of business, some sort of money. Ask somebody, whatever it is, I'll try to bring home some money. So the father says, go. So this boy goes and he travels, right? He knew that he had a rich uncle. He goes and he travels to this rich uncle. And the Kav Yasha continues with the story and says that they stayed for 7 days, and the uncle was, this relative was asking about all, the entire family. After 7 days, this relative goes and asks this boy. This boy goes to his relative and says, "Listen, I have a question. I have a request from you. Please don't leave me empty-handed." And the relative says, "What can I do for you?" And he says, I know you have a daughter that's single. I'm single. I would like to marry your daughter. And this relative says, as a distant relative, he says, listen, he says, don't do it. 3 men died the night of the wedding. I don't want you marrying my daughter. That's not the thing that you need to do. And the guy says, no, you got, this is what I request. Please grant me my request. So the relative says, what do you need? You need money? I'll give you money. Just don't marry her. It's not going to end good for you. And the guy is pushing until finally the relative says, you know what? You want to? Fine. He says, we'll set up the wedding date. They set up the wedding date. The day of the wedding, earlier on in the day, there was an old man that comes over to this boy, to the chassan, and tells him, he says, listen, he says, the boy already saw that there was something different about this old man. It did not look like a regular, normal human man. It looked like a very righteous person. And this old man goes over to him and says, listen, when there's going to be an old man, a poor old man that's going to come to you in the wedding feast, and he's going to ask you to do everything that he asks. Give him the covet, give him everything and anything that he asks. And with that, he disappears. So, the boy hears this, continues on with the preparation. The day of the wedding, the wedding time comes, and it's in the middle of the feast, and everybody's busy, everybody's rushing, giving over mazel tov. And suddenly, there's a poor person, really, really poor, comes into the wedding hall. And there's ripped clothing, smells older, and he makes his way towards the chassan. The chassan sees him, he remembers what the old man told him. He jumps up, and he says, please, and he brings him, and he sits. This is the chassan. He sits down, he gives him to eat, and he says, what could I do for you? And this poor man is saying, I want this, and the guy is running all over the place on his wedding night, trying to make this poor person, happy. After the wedding, this poor person comes over to the chassan, and he says, I am a messenger from God. I am the Malach HaMavis. I'm the angel of death, and I came here to return your soul. So the groom, the chassan, starts begging for his life. He says, you gotta, you can't just take me. And, the angel of death is like, you're not having it. You can't beg, the angel of death. So the groom says, listen, you want to take my soul? I just got married. I need to ask my wife. I gotta speak to her before I make any decision. So this poor man, who's really the angel of death, says, because you have done me this favor, I'll let you, you were very good to me. You gave me everything, all my requests during the wedding. I'll let you ask your wife. Go ask your wife. So the husband goes and finds his wife. His wife was sitting in the room, and she was sitting and she was crying and saying Tehillim, praying. And the husband goes over to her and he says, I came over here to say goodbye. She's like, what do you mean? Why are you saying goodbye? And he says, my end has come. The angel of death came and he's here to take my soul. And she's like, what? The angel of death is here to take your soul? And he's like, he's right outside. Yeah, he told me, I just asked to, get permission. I'm married and everything. And he said, where's the angel of death? He's like, right outside. So the wife says, you sit here, I'm going to go talk to him. The guy says, okay, right. I'm not messing with my wife the day of the wedding, the marriage. She goes out and she finds the angel of death, and she says, what, you want to take my husband? He says, yeah, it's his time. He says, but what doesn't, and she quotes a pasuk from the Torah. Pasuk in Devarim, chapter 24, verse 5. It says, when a man marries a woman, it says that he has to say, shana achas, he has to stay with her. 1 year he has to stay with her, and he has to make his wife happy. He says, if you take my husband, he's not going to be able to make me happy. You're going to make the Torah, be a lie. He says, how do you do that? So the angel of death says, you ask a question, but, I'm just the messenger. I got to speak to God. So he goes and asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what am I supposed to do? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, he says, because of the chesed that your husband, that the man, the husband did, you're going to let him live. And the lesson is that we learn from this is that when you do kindness for somebody else, you're really doing kindness to yourself. We think that we're doing chesed for somebody else. But in essence, the truth of the matter, we're only doing chesed for ourselves. And that's why David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Ach toiv v'chesed yerdifuni kol yemei chayei. Says, I want kindness to yerdifuni, is roidif, I want him to chase me. What is the chase? As a Chavetz Chaim, what's the chasing? What's the chasing that's happening over here from the chesed? Because when you do kindness to somebody else, it takes your time, it takes your money, there's things that come out of it, and you're like, okay, I want kindness to chase after me. To look at it, because if not kindness, something else will chase after me, and I'd rather kindness chase after me. And a man once came to the Chavetz Chaim. He wanted children, didn't have children, tried everything, didn't have children, went to the rabbi. So, Chavetz Chaim, the rabbi says, it doesn't depend on me. He says, this is the will of heaven. But I'll give you a piece of advice. Open up a gemach. Open up a free loan society, open up something that you can give and help the people, and with that, you'll have tremendous amount of, success. So, he opens up a gemach within a year. Didn't have children for many, many years. Within 1 year, he had a baby boy. And he was a lady, and he continued with the gemach. And as the years went, one child after another. After a few years, he had 5 children. A guy who couldn't have any children, all of a sudden had 5 children. But he has now a growing family, and it's becoming difficult for him to upkeep the gemach, to be able to continue this, this kindness that he does for the public. So he goes over to the Chavetz Chaim and he says, listen, I have a busy schedule. I have my obligations to my wife. I have the obligations to my children. I can't continue with this gemach. So the Chavetz Chaim tells him, he says, don't give up the gemach. Hashem will help you. Hashem will give you the strength and you'll be able to continue doing it. But he decided, in any case, he couldn't handle it, and he decided to close the gemach. The night that he closed the gemach, his son didn't feel well, and he passed away. And he ran over to the rabbi. He says, Rabbi, what am I supposed to do? So the Chavetz Chaim goes over to him and he says, you should know that you did not deserve children. You are not supposed to have children. What was designated from up above was that you won't have children. But because you started doing chesed for others, in Shemayim, in the heaven, God had mercy on you. You did good kindness to others. God will do kindness to you. And therefore, you have to go back and continue, open the gemach, manage the gemach in order to protect the rest of your children. Because when we do kindness, we think we do kindness for other people, but really, in reality, we do kindness for ourselves. Just to give you one final story on this, the Nazis surrounded a city, and the Jews inside knew that they were in trouble. The families got together and they figured out there was 12 in the city. There was 12 safe spaces where they could all hide. One particular family struggled and they were unable to get to any of the 12 places. And one of the girls of this family was like, wait a minute, not in one of these 12 places. It says there's a certain basement that's deserted, that's hidden, we could hide over there. And the entire family runs, and they were able to get into this basement. They spent 3 years in this basement, and they were the only Jews in the entire city who survived the Nazis. For 3 years, they stayed there until it was liberated, and they were able to get out. But how did they get to this basement? This little girl tells them, says, you know how I remember this basement? So there was a poor man that used to live over here. And she goes over to her parents. He used to send me to bring him food and bring him, wash his clothing, to do chesed with him. And this was his house, and that's how I remembered it. Because when we do kindness for others, in essence, we're really doing kindness for ourselves. And this is why Rabbi Victor Miller writes, and he says that every day you should do one act of kindness that no one knows about. Pick up a piece of garbage. Do something. If no one knows, it's better. But do at least one act of kindness. That's why it's so amazing. Daily Giving, dailygiving.org. A shout out to Daily Giving is so amazing. Where you could do one act. You could every day you're giving $1 at least at tzedakah. You're doing something. So you do one act of kindness. Do something for some sort of some act of kindness. Saying Rabbi Victor Miller. So let's go over here and let's try to do a recap over here and everything that we spoke about and to answer the original question. So the original question that we asked, something that was bothering me, is that in the secular world, it seems that it's better English I should speak, may I, that it is it is more beneficial to a person. They feel better when the other person knows that they're doing kindness. Because what? Because they get appreciation. They get there's enjoyment that they have over here. So we went through a long journey tonight, and I hope that you stuck with me. And just to give a recap to be able to answer that question, we spoke about that the way that the geulah is going to come, the way that the redemption, the way the Mashiach is going to come, it's going to be through chesed. It's through acts of kindness. And this is also why the Gemara tells us that if you want to save from the Chevle Mashiach, you have to do acts of kindness and learn Torah. Acts of kindness, chesed is huge. So Moshe Rabbeinu saw this. Moshe Rabbeinu saw the importance of chesed, and he saw that the Jewish people were not standing up, were not fighting for one another. There was no one. He looked here and he looked there, and no one was saving this Jew who was about to be killed by this Egyptian. So he gave up his power. He gave up his position to teach a lesson to the Jewish people that you have to do for someone else, because that's what's going to get you out of here. Because that's how it is. It has to start with chesed, and that's why. How did the redemption start? HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, tell them to go and ask from their friends to borrow gold and silver. Why is it friends? So the two interpretations we gave. Number one, it was from your friends. You have to start from your Jewish friends, because everything has to start with chesed with one of you. Once you start with chesed from your friends, then you branch it out, and then you can do chesed from the Egyptians. How do you get the chesed from the Egyptians? How are the Egyptians friends? Because you did chesed to them, you saved them when through the plague of darkness. You saved the Egyptians. Now the question that we ask: so why do we need to take the Egyptians' money? Why do we even begin to need this way? Because the Jewish people needed to be paid. But how did they get paid? It depends on different factors. And if they were able to get the money for the Egyptians, not only did they get paid, but they're also going to get their self-esteem, their pride with them as well. And not only that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated in a way that the Jewish people should be chased by the Egyptians, so that the Egyptians should be able to die in the sea, and this way the Jewish people will be ultimately the really free. Because otherwise they would always be looking over their shoulders when the Egyptians coming to take them home, when the Egyptians coming to take them back to servitude. And this is the chesed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated all in this huge, beautiful circle that we see, and how everything worked out in the way that it needed to. And this was the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it wasn't like the redemption of the king of Persia by Cyrus, where if it would have been the Paro's change of heart, we would have been in debt to them. We would have been mishubadim to Paro Mitzrayim. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, only to me you're going to be mishubad. Only to me you're going to be your only work. You only have a service of gratitude only to me. And this is how it's going to be in the future. In the future, it's only going to be Hashem. In this day and age, and we're going in the days that is very close to the geulah, we're very close to Mashiach, we have to realize that it's not going to be the United Nations, it's not going to be United States. We see how the United States is slowly pulling away and making Israel do all these things. We didn't really speak too much about the current events, but we see over here that the United States, what used to be a very strong supporter, and still is a strong supporter, but is starting to pull away and do things in a different manner. And the United Nations continue to be against Israel. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to show us, just like the redemption of Mitzrayim, it was only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It wasn't a change of heart of the United Nations. It wasn't a change of heart of the United States. It wasn't anybody else. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved us from Mitzrayim, and that's what's going to happen in the end of the days. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to save us, and that is what we have to rely. We have to rely and realize that it's only HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we could rely on. And this is the difference of why the reward for the dogs and for the donkeys is very different, because the donkeys, they did something. They had the burden of the Jewish people's money on their back. They did something for them, and just like Dassan and aviram, they did something. They had the burden. They had this doing for others. They had this chesed aspect of Dassan and aviram, and that's why they survived so long, all the way until Machlokes, and that's where it broke it off. But this is what the lesson that we need to learn: that when you do for others, there's so much power that come into it. But then, how do we go? And how do we answer the original question? And the original question was that how come we see over here from the scientific aspect is that it looks like it's better that when you do chesed that the other person can thank you, as opposed to when you do chesed that the other person doesn't know about it. And the answer is that's how we ended off. And that's, I have to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for this answer. It makes me feel good. I hope it makes you feel good. And the answer is, listen to this beautiful answer, because when you do chesed for others, you're really doing chesed for yourself. That ultimately, yeah, we are selfish. We are. And when you do for others, in a sense, you're going to give to you, just like the story of the Kavi Yashar, where the man was giving to the poor man, the chassan was giving to the poor man. In essence, he just saves his life. Or in the story of the Nazis, and this family was going and says, "I want you to go and help this poor man." In essence, it saved their life. Or it's the story of the Chavetz Chaim with the man who had the gemach when he was doing for others, but in essence, he was really doing for himself. So you want to know how and why it's going to give you the ultimate happiness when you do kindness for others and somebody, and you're not going to know about it, because you have to realize that anything you do for others, it's midah keneged midah, that you're going to do for others, but ultimately Hashem is going to pay you back. And that is the lesson that we have to have a takeaway. And we have to realize that we want Mashiach to come. We want the end of all these wars. And we want the geulah to come. And the Beis HaMikdash should be rebuilt. So we have to start off with the chesed. Just like the chesed started off in the geulah in Mitzrayim, we have to start off with the chesed. And we have to care about other people. We have to feel for other people. And if you can't do anything about somebody else, but at least if you're feeling for somebody else, that is already counts for something. And with that, with the feeling and with the doing that we have, the chesed that we have to be able to do to our brothers and sisters locally and in Israel, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu help us and bring the geulah b'mehera b'yameinu. Okay, we will open up to questions. Okay. Yes, thank you, Shira. You are my opening. I can't say opening act because you are a standalone, amazing. But yes, absolutely to that comment. Okay. Oh, thank you for the kind words. Okay, here. I want to ask your thoughts regarding the Osama bin Laden popularity. I know you want to discuss it, but you're short on time. So I think I spoke about it at one of the classes. The question goes, recently there has been started with TikTok. There was a burst of popularity to Osama bin Laden, which is something that is ridiculous. These are a burst of popularity from Americans about a terrorist that went and killed Americans. So how do you come to this, conclusion where you have people that are so twisted that somebody that killed their neighbors, their friends, their, some of them parents, they could come and be like, oh yeah, maybe Osama bin Laden, was right. And many lessons that we could take out of it, but one of the lessons, because I don't want to get into it, I think I spoke about it. Maybe I did. I definitely spoke about it. Maybe I didn't record it. But one of the lessons, one of the takeaways is you see how twisted, how twisted people can be, and they could come to a reality where they could say that the most evil person, in the past, who knows how many years, is actually really good. When you don't have the Torah, when you go based on your own reasoning and your own logic, you have the ability to make such radical errors. And this is such a lesson to learn, that when you go based on your own emotions or when your own intelligence, you could sometimes come to such a stupid conclusion, such a wrong, conclusion as these people did. But again, I don't know what you expect for this generation, where a boy can be a girl and a girl could be a boy, and they can decide to change, and they can be a cat and a dragon and anything in between. These are unfortunately unhealthy minds. But you could see the radical errors that that can come from it. Is helping your married children count as chesed? Absolutely. There's actually a class that I am I'm working on the aspect of chesed and the aspect of servitude that Bezat Hashem must make. But 100% you help your children, that is chesed. If you stop and you think that you're being nice to your spouse, you're doing something with your kids, if you stop and you realize this is a mitzvah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Obviously, you have to have a little bit of a kavanah. You have to, think about it for a second and be like, I'm doing it because, this is what I need to do. But you get reward for that. You get reward for spending time with your wife. You get reward for spending time with your children. There's many positive things that happen that we don't even begin. We think it's an obligation. We don't even realize that it is, a chesed. And I realize now that we've got to say the kapitel tehillim for the soldiers and for the people in Israel. So we'll say, as usual, kapitel kuf lamed 130, and then we will close it off. Shiram alais mimamakim karasicha adonai Adonai shema bekoili tiena aznecha kashuv vais lekol tachanunai im avonai sish maria Adonai mi yamoid ki imcha aslicha leman tivarei Kivi siyadene kiv so nafshi v'lidvarai hoichalti nafshi la'adonai mishamim la'beiker shamim la'beiker yachal Yisrael al Adonai ki ma'adonai yachesed v'harbei ma'ifedus v'hu yiftas Yisrael mikol avanesav achenu kol beis Yisrael hanesunim batzara uvashivya ha'imdim bein bayam uvein bayabasha hamakam yirachim aleihem v'yatzim mitzara l'ervacha ma'afela le'oira mishibud le'geulah hashta bagala bezman karev v'neimar amen. I'd like to thank you all for joining. Until next time, may you all have an amazing, amazing week.